I discovered my parents stole my $200,000 trust fund to support my sister. This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. I never thought the people who were supposed to love me the most would betray me so deeply. I had always known that my parents favored my sister Corey, but I never imagined they would go as far as stealing from me, taking away my future without a second thought. When I found out they had drained my trust fund, the one thing securing my dreams, I felt a mixture of shock, rage, and overwhelming sadness. It happened on my 18th birthday. My grandparents had thrown me a party, just as they had for Corey when she turned 18. The house was decorated, family and friends gathered, and for once I felt like I was being seen. When my grandfather stood up and announced that he was handing over my trust fund, the money he and my grandmother had saved for me since birth, I felt a wave of relief. I had been counting on that money for college to build a life of my own. The guests clapped, congratulating me, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. But then I noticed my parents. They weren't smiling. They weren't clapping. They stood in the corner, exchanging uncomfortable glances, their faces tight with something that wasn't joy. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking maybe they were just emotional. I had no idea what was coming. Later that night, after the party ended, my parents sat me down in the living room. My father cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. My mother wrung her hands, not meeting my eyes. The way they looked at each other, hesitating, made my stomach drop. "We can't give you the trust fund," my father finally said, his voice heavy. I blinked, trying to process his words. "What do you mean?" he sighed, running a hand down his face. "It's gone. Gone." Just like that. I felt my heart stop for a second. "What do you mean it's gone? That money was for my future." My mother spoke up, her voice weak. "We had to use it. Corey needed it." My hands curled into fists. "You used my money for Corey? Without even telling me?" "She needed it more than you," my father said, as if that was supposed to justify it. "Her therapies, her treatments, and we didn't have a choice. We did what was best for the family." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "Best for the family? Or best for Corey?" My father's jaw tightened. "She's your sister. You should understand that her needs come first." "Why do her needs always come first?" I snapped. "Have you ever thought about what I need? About my future?" "You're healthy, you're smart," my mother said, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. "You have so much potential. Corey, she needs more help. And that means stealing from me?" My voice cracked, my entire body trembling. "You took everything. You didn't even ask me." "We didn't have a choice," my father repeated, as if that made it any better. I stood up, my breath shaky. "You're telling me you spent $200,000 without once thinking to tell me? Without even thinking about how this would affect me?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We thought you'd understand." "Understand?" I let out a hollow laugh. "You don't even regret it, do you? You think what you did was okay?" "It was necessary," my father said coldly. I stared at them, trying to comprehend how the people who raised me could be so selfish. "You don't see me as a person," I whispered. "I'm just an afterthought to you. My whole life, you've made me sacrifice for Corey. But this is too much." My mother's face crumpled. "Sweetheart, don't," I cut her off. "Don't act like you care now." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "So what am I supposed to do now?" I finally asked, my voice hollow. "Just give up on college, on my future?" My father sighed. "We were hoping you'd understand and help us with Corey. We're getting older, and soon she'll need someone to take care of her full time." I let out a sharp breath, the anger inside me boiling over. "So not only did you steal from me, but now you expect me to give up my entire life for her?" "She's your sister," my mother said, as if that explained everything. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me." My father's expression darkened. "Watch your tone." "Or what?" I snapped. "You'll steal something else from me? Oh, wait, there's nothing left to take." My mother looked at me, her face pale. "We just thought—" "You never thought about me," I shouted, the dam finally breaking. "You never cared about what I wanted, about what I needed. Everything has always been about Corey." My father stood up, his face red with anger. If you can't be grateful for what we've done for you, then maybe you don't belong here. I stared at him, stunned. You're kicking me out, I whispered, his lips pressed into a thin line. If you can't support this family, then maybe you should find another place to live. My mother gasped, but she didn't say anything. She never did when it mattered. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the truth. They had never seen me as an individual. I was just an extension of Corey, someone to take care of her, someone to sacrifice for her. My dreams, my future, my existence outside of her, none of it mattered. Fine, I said, my voice steady despite the tears burning in my eyes. I'll go. Where will you even go? My mother asked, her voice breaking. I'll figure it out, I said, without you. I walked out of that house that night with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a broken heart. But I wasn't done yet. They had stolen from me, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, my chest tight with a mixture of rage and betrayal. They had stolen from me, taken away everything I had been counting on for my future, and now they had the audacity to act like I was the selfish one. I had nowhere to go, but there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The next morning, I drove straight to my grandparents' house. They had always been the only ones in my family who treated me as an individual, not just as Corey's shadow. I parked in their driveway, hesitating for only a second before knocking on the door. My grandmother opened it, her face lighting up in surprise. Oh, sweetheart, what a nice surprise. The moment I saw her, my chest tightened and all the emotions I had been holding back crashed over me. They took my trust fund, I said, my voice breaking. All of it. Her smile vanished instantly. What? Before I could say another word, my grandfather appeared in the doorway, frowning. What's going on? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mom and Dad spent all my trust fund on Corey. They never told me. I only found out last night when I asked for it. And when I got upset, they kicked me out. My grandmother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. My grandfather's face turned red, his jaw tightening in anger. Those ungrateful. He cut himself off, taking a deep breath to calm himself. Then he gestured for me to come inside. Sit down. Tell us everything. I did. I told them everything. How my parents had used my money to fund Corey's expensive shopping habits, how they had justified it by saying she needed it more, how they had expected me to just accept it and take care of her for the rest of my life. I had always known my parents favored Corey, but this was beyond anything I had ever imagined. By the time I finished, my grandparents looked furious. My grandmother was shaking her head in disbelief while my grandfather had his hands clenched into fists. This is unacceptable, he said through gritted teeth. That money was meant for you, not for them, not for Corey. I know, I said quietly. My grandmother reached across the table, taking my hands in hers. You did the right thing by coming here. Sweetheart, we'll fix this. How? I asked, my voice raw. The money's gone. They spent it all. There's nothing left. Then they'll pay it back, my grandfather said firmly, whether they like it or not. I wasn't sure what he meant at first, but then I saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. That same day, my grandparents called my parents. I sat in the living room, listening as my grandfather tore into them. You stole from her, he growled. That was her money, and you had no right to take it. I couldn't hear what my father was saying on the other end, but whatever it was, it didn't calm my grandfather down. I don't want to hear your excuses, he snapped. You will pay back every single cent, or I will take legal action. I flinched at the sound of my mother's voice rising through the phone, muffled but frantic. I don't care, my grandfather interrupted. You think you can just steal from your own child and get away with it? You think you can kick her out and pretend none of this ever happened? Well, you're wrong. Silence stretched between them for several seconds before my grandfather spoke again, his voice cold. You have 1 week to come up with a plan. If you don't, we'll see you in court. He hung up the phone without another word. I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding. They're never going to forgive me for this, I murmured. My grandfather scoffed. They don't deserve forgiveness. My grandmother pulled me into a hug. You don't have to go back there, sweetheart. You can stay here as long as you need. And just like that, for the first time in my life, I felt safe. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few days passed in a blur. My grandparents did everything they could to make me feel at home. But there was a heaviness in my chest that wouldn't go away. Every time I thought about my parents, about how they had looked me in the eyes and told me I didn't matter, I felt sick. But I wasn't just sad. I was angry. They had stolen from me. And even after being confronted, they hadn't even apologized. They acted like it was their right to take my money because I was the lucky one. On the third day, my grandfather received a call from my parents. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into my untouched cup of coffee, when he answered. I could hear my father's voice, strained and defensive. We need more time, he said. My grandfather sighed, rubbing his temple. You've already had time. You knew exactly what you were doing when you took that money. We didn't have a choice, my father argued. You don't understand what it takes to care for Corey. Oh, I understand perfectly, my grandfather snapped. What I don't understand is why you thought stealing from your other daughter was the right solution. Silence. Then my mother spoke, her voice quiet and pleading. We needed help. We thought she would understand. I couldn't take it anymore. Before my grandfather could respond, I grabbed the phone from his hand. I do understand, I said coldly. I understand that you never thought of me as anything more than Corey's caretaker. I understand that you think my life matters less than hers. I understand that you'd rather see me homeless than admit you were wrong. That's not true, my mother said quickly. Really? I laughed bitterly. Then why did you kick me out? Another silence. Then my father sighed. This conversation isn't getting us anywhere. Listen, we'll figure something out. Just give us some time. I clenched my jaw. You have a week. After that, we're going to a lawyer. I hung up. My grandparents watched me carefully. You did the right thing, my grandfather said. I nodded, but I didn't feel any better. The next few days were quiet. I tried to distract myself, but every night, I lay awake thinking about Corey. She was innocent in all of this. I knew she didn't understand what was happening, but I missed her. I wanted to talk to her, to see her, but I knew my parents would never allow it. Then on the sixth day, something unexpected happened. I was in the kitchen with my grandmother when the doorbell rang. My grandfather opened it, and to my shock, Corey was standing there. My mother was behind her, looking exhausted and nervous. She wouldn't stop asking about her sister, my mother said. So, I brought her here. I stared at Corey. She looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes wide and uncertain. Hi, she said softly. My throat tightened. Hi, Corey. She hesitated before stepping inside. She looked around, frowning. Why don't you come home? I swallowed hard. I can't, Corey. Her face twisted in confusion. Did I do something bad? No, I said quickly, kneeling in front of her. No, sweetie, you didn't do anything wrong. Her lower lip trembled. Then why are you mad? I felt my chest tighten. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell her that our parents had stolen from me without making her feel like a burden? Before I could answer, my grandmother spoke gently. Corey, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. Your sister isn't mad at you, but she needs some time to figure things out. Corey looked at me again, searching my face. Then after a long moment, she threw her arms around me. I miss you, she whispered. I squeezed my eyes shut, hugging her tightly. I miss you too. For a brief moment, I forgot everything else. All the anger, all the betrayal, it melted away in Corey's embrace. But then my mother cleared her throat. So, about the money. I pulled away from Corey, standing up slowly. What about it? My mother shifted uncomfortably. We've been looking at our finances and we can't pay it back in full. I crossed my arms. So what's your plan? She hesitated before finally saying, we can start making payments, small ones, over time. I narrowed my eyes. How much time? 18 months, she admitted. My grandfather, who had been quiet until now, spoke firmly. If you agree to that, we're putting it in writing. With a lawyer. My mother's face fell, but she nodded. I exhaled slowly. Part of me wanted to fight. Part of me wanted to scream that they should suffer the way they had made me suffer. But another part of me just wanted to move forward. Fine, I said. But if you miss one payment, we go to court. My mother nodded. We won't miss one. I didn't believe her. But at least now, I had something. A chance to get my future back. When they left, I sat on the couch exhausted. My grandmother rubbed my back. You okay? I thought about it. No, I admitted, but I will be. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe my parents would keep their promise. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe things would never be the same between us. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't letting them control me anymore. And that was enough. The days passed, and though the weight of everything still sat heavy on my chest, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't walking on eggshells, constantly trying to make my parents happy or putting Corey's needs ahead of my own. I was just me. My parents had agreed to the payment plan, and within a week we had everything in writing. My grandfather's lawyer drafted the documents, making sure every condition was airtight. If they missed even one payment, they'd be sued for the full amount. My parents had no choice but to sign. When they left the lawyer's office that day, my father barely looked at me. My mother gave me a sad, tired smile, but I didn't return it. I wasn't ready to forgive them. The first payment came on time, a small deposit into my account. Seeing it there felt like proof that I had done the right thing. But still, a part of me wondered, how long would they actually keep this up? Weeks passed. I focused on rebuilding. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore, saving up as much as I could while preparing for college. My grandparents were incredible, supporting me in every way they could. But the biggest surprise? Corey. She called me almost every day. Sometimes it was just to tell me what she had for breakfast, or to ask if I remembered a random memory from when we were kids. Other times, she asked why I wasn't coming home. It's complicated, I always told her. Because of money? She asked one day. I hesitated. Yeah, kind of. She was quiet for a long moment before she said, I wish I could help. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You are helping, I told her, just by calling me. Then, a month in, it happened. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a notification. My bank app. The second payment from my parents was supposed to come through that morning. But when I opened the app, my balance hadn't changed. They had missed it. My hands clenched around my phone. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe it was late. But deep down, I already knew the truth. They had no intention of keeping their word. That night, I called my father. He picked up on the third ring. Hey, he said, sounding wary. Where's the money? I asked flatly. He sighed. Look, things are tight this month. We just need a little more time. No, I cut him off. You had time. You signed a contract. If you don't pay, we go to court. It's that simple. Jesus, he muttered. You really don't care about this family, do you? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You stole from me and kicked me out, and now you're acting like I'm the bad guy? We did what we had to do for Corey, he snapped. You're just being selfish. Selfish? My voice rose. You stole $200,000 from your own daughter. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like we spent it on vacations and cars, he shot back. Everything went to Corey's needs. We didn't have a choice. Yes, you did, I said coldly. You could have told me the truth. You could have asked for help. Instead, you lied and stole from me. Now you want pity? There was silence on the other end. Then my father spoke, his voice lower, angrier. We're family. You really want to take this to court? You want to ruin our lives over money? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. No, I said quietly. You ruined this, not me. And I hung up. 2 days later, my grandfather's lawyer filed the lawsuit. That's when everything exploded. My parents were furious. My mother called me in tears, begging me to reconsider. My father sent a long, angry email telling me I was a disgrace for dragging our family through the mud. And then came the messages from other family members. You really want to put your own parents in court? They raised you and this is how you repay them? Corey needs them. What if this destroys everything for her? It was like everyone had conveniently forgotten that they were the ones who stole from me. But I didn't back down. The case moved forward. My parents tried to fight it, but with the contract they had signed, they didn't stand a chance. In the end, they were forced to agree to a new repayment plan, one where the court had control over their wages until my money was fully restored. They lost complete access to their own accounts. Every paycheck, a portion of their income went straight to me. And just like that, the power shifted. They hated me for it. My father refused to speak to me after the ruling. My mother sent occasional guilt-tripping messages, but I ignored them. Corey, though, she still called. "Mom and Dad are mad," she said one night. I sighed. "I know, but I'm not mad," she said softly. "I just miss you." My throat tightened. "I miss you too, Corey. Will you ever come home?" I closed my eyes. "Probably not," I admitted. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Can I come visit you instead?" I smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." In the end, I lost my parents, but maybe I hadn't lost everything. Maybe for the first time, I had finally gained something. Myself. The court's ruling changed everything. My parents no longer had control, not over me, not over my money, not even over their own finances. The repayments were automatic now, deducted from their paychecks before they could even touch their earnings. They had no choice but to pay me back. Little by little, month by month, until every last dollar was returned. At first, they tried to hold on to their pride. My father refused to acknowledge me in court. He sat stiffly, jaw clenched, barely looking in my direction. My mother tried to soften things, sending long-winded messages about how families should stick together, how I should have just let it go. But with every payment that left their bank account and landed in mine, their anger grew. They blamed me for their suffering. They blamed me for their humiliation. But never once did they blame themselves. The house they had once spoiled Corey in, filling every corner with pink trinkets and custom-made luxuries, was now weighed down by stress and resentment. The shopping spree stopped. The expensive gifts vanished. And for the first time, my parents had to tell Corey no. I didn't see it happen, but I could imagine it clearly. Corey, confused and upset, demanding why she couldn't have the things she always had before. My mother, wringing her hands trying to explain. My father snapping under the pressure, anger boiling over because, for the first time in his life, he was powerless. One evening, weeks after the ruling, my phone rang. It was Corey. "They're fighting a lot," she said, her voice quiet. "Dad yells all the time. Mom cries. They say it's your fault." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "I know. But is it?" I hesitated. How could I explain this to her? How could I make her understand without making her feel like the cause of all of this? "No," I finally said. "It's not my fault, and it's not your fault either. It's theirs." She was silent for a long time. Then in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "I wish you were still home." "I know, Corey," I said, my throat tightening. "Me too." But home was never really home. Was it? It was just a place where I existed, where I sacrificed, where I was expected to disappear so someone else could shine. Not anymore. The last time I saw my parents was months later outside a grocery store. They didn't see me at first. My mother looked thinner, her face drawn with stress. My father, always so sure of himself, looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. They stood at the checkout, counting cash before hesitantly putting items back on the shelf. It should have made me feel satisfied. It should have felt like justice. But all I felt was emptiness. They had chosen this. They had put themselves here. And they still refused to admit it. As I walked past, my mother's eyes flickered up and met mine. For a second, just a brief second, something in her expression cracked. Regret? Shame? It was gone before I could tell. She looked away quickly, as if I were a ghost, someone she had already buried. My father never even turned around. I walked out of the store and never looked back. Some people think family is unconditional, that no matter what, you should forgive, you should forget, you should endure. But I learned something different. Family is only family when they treat you like one. And sometimes walking away isn't betrayal, it's survival. So what do you think? Was I right to stand up for myself? Was I wrong to take them to court? If you've ever been in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your stories too. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe for more real-life stories like this one. Who knows? The next one might be yours.